the Cariciri.
Yeah.
Right, scare the Cariciri. We used to do that, and it's not that far away on time, right? It's just right there that we still doing these kind of things. Now, of course, the children don't get scared too easily now. But when I was a kid, I was very scared about the Cariciri and the smoking odor that you have to, identify on your way or something.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can segue, like thinking about storytelling and reflections on the workshops that we've done with Pachaisana, but just the way that stories give us a particular insight, popular culture and stories give us a particular insight into the culture, into the child rearing, but also into the attempt to frame events or meaning making practice, like make meaning of things that are happening, in the communities, in local histories or even in broader context,
Yeah,
So,
but according to my mother, it was only for, the parents told us that stories in order to scare the children to do not, be walking around during the night,
right.
don't go partying because the Cariciri is around, these kind of things. But I don't know, because my grandfather looks very scary too.
Yeah, good. Well, welcome everyone. Idris, are you with us?
I just parked my car. I'm sorry.
Oh,
but
there
I'm
you
good.
are. Okay, yeah, you're coming from someplace else. Okay. Well, we look forward to integrating you into the discussion. So once you get settled, you can kind of come back online.
Okay.
So good, but good to have you and welcome everybody. And this is our Distance Unlearning Hour, which is a forum for discussion about decoloniality, decolonial methods and practices. And typically the sessions that are scheduled after a workshop are, we try to make the most out of them to reflect on our experiences with the workshops. And the last workshop that we did with Pachaisana, which was the second in a series, was really focused on music and um, I guess just thinking about like music and the body, thinking about the type of expression that we can capture uniquely through that kind of modality. So I just wanted to say welcome. For those of you who did not participate in the workshop, those of us who did can kind of fill you in on what happened. And then from there, our conversation typically expands.
I had to leave the workshop slightly early, and so I wouldn't mind if Emily and Michelle, who were both part of it, if you could at least tell me what happened after I left, and maybe we can piece together the workshop a little bit for Elvia and Idris.
Emily, do you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, let me try to refresh my mind back to the week to see if I can remember it. But yeah, I remember we were playing a lot with the idea of sounds that like kind of ideas. So one of the speakers would say something and then we'd kind of make a sound that reflects what was being said in our mind. And the idea was to try and convey a story using only sounds we made. And I know that a few people, like Michelle, I think you brought in an instrument as well. A few people brought in instruments, and then we broke out into the breakout rooms and tried to create a story about how each of us reacted to the workshop using just kind of sounds, but also movements that mimic that. So I don't know, Michelle, maybe you could give a more detailed explanation of it.
Yeah, so I think that in part, I think Emily, you're right on, with kind of some of the exercises that we did. But in part, it was just sort of exploring sound, and maybe telling narratives through sound, that kind of pushes us in a lot of interesting ways beyond linguistic communication, and how that is a very effective method of like capturing ideas or concepts as well, right? As we sort of, in a previous workshop, we had done sort of static poses, or movement poses, to sort of like tell a story or capture like a word that was presented to us. And in this case, sound came into play as a pretty important sort of component, particularly important maybe in the Andes, because of the fact that we're talking about oral traditions. I can't remember if we mentioned it in the context of the workshop or not, but the fact that most indigenous languages, and not so much like a contrast to non-indigenous languages, is that they incorporate sounds in their storytelling. So the idea phones, that conjure the idea of a sound, like they conjure the image of a sound. One of my favorite parts of the workshop was at the beginning. I think, Richard, you were still there, where Daniel played different types of music and invited us to sort of like dance around and move our bodies to however that music made us feel. And for me, that was so revealing, right? Like, not just in terms of kind of taking the temperature of our own body, like, how are we feeling? Are we feeling stiff? Are we feeling comfortable? Like, how do we feel about dancing around in front of other people? The fact that it deconstructed all the hierarchies between professors and staff and students, because we're all kind of doing this, in a very vulnerable sort of position, but also what it reveals about ourselves, our personalities and things like that, in terms of how we move and how we sound. So I think, Richard, you were still there when we did that, right?
Well, I mean, actually, Michelle, it's quite difficult, I must say, because I actually left because I wanted to leave the workshop. And I wanted to leave because of that moment. Some of the music that was played kind of upset me because of the memory that they were associated with. And it was, there was a piece by Michael Nyman, the piano, and then there was Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings. And both pieces I just really associate with my father, who as you know, passed away around about a year ago this time. And I didn't know at the time that that's why I needed to leave. And it was a really strange feeling that I felt. Initially, I thought I really needed to leave because after that activity, Chell ended up doing another related activity that was probably leading into the breakout room. So it wasn't listening to music, but it was with our bodies thinking about responsive to sounds more generally. And I think at the time I was like, I just don't want to do this. Like I had this really kind of feeling of, I don't want to do this. I want to do something else. I want to read a book, or I want to, I don't want to be standing here making sounds. And I had this very visceral reaction. And I thought it was like that. I thought it was actually a reaction. And so I'm kind of, so Emily, you describing what you went on to do in the breakout rooms, I now regret that I didn't stay, because I would have maybe been able to process through how I felt in the workshop itself, but I didn't. I just, I kind of ran away. And it felt like I was running away. And so I don't know, but it's interesting, that feeling of, some of that music made me, react in a way that maybe equated with some of the ways Michelle was talking about, like, head banging or dancing in certain ways. But something else was happening to me when that music was happening, and I couldn't control it. And then it affected me, and then I had to leave. So it was very complicated for me, that experience. But I haven't had that experience in these workshops before, this need to just get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, but as I said, I just wish I hadn't, so I could have processed together with you all. Maybe I would have made a sound that would have reflected how I felt.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very complicated, but I wanted to be honest with you all about why I left. It wasn't like I had something, no emergency, no nothing, just the kind of, I've got to leave. And I've never felt that before in the workshop, ever. So very strange.
Wow. Well, thank you for your candor and for sharing that, Richard. And one thing I can maybe comment on is that in this experience of the workshops, both of us have had kind of reactions to it, right? So for me, it was the previous one, you know, like where we had certain poses and there were certain words that for me, like I just didn't have any expression. Like I just kind of froze. Like there was nothing that I could think of to incorporate that. And that feeling of like not knowing or confusion or freezing triggered a memory for me about something that I interpreted as an incident of discrimination, you know, and it was powerful for me to kind of process all of that, you know, and how that triggered all of those memories, right? And in the end, I think that both the experience of the workshop and the event itself was productive, you know, because it made me, how can I say, like understand what discrimination is from a very embodied perspective, you know, that it feels like what is going on? You're confused, your mind isn't enough to address it, thoughts are jumbled. Um, Questions that emerge like, is it about me? Is it because they heard me speaking Spanish? Did they think I was the nanny? Like, is it a class thing? Like maybe because I don't live in Central Bexley, you know, like things like that. But in any case, both of these incidents, I think, speak to the power of stories, you know, and like what they can conjure in us, and exploring stories beyond narrative, right? Beyond like what we think of in terms of words, right? Um, and thinking about these other aspects of storytelling through embodiment, you know, and through kind of like the superlingual stuff like music, you know. So really powerful in that sense.
I think as well, Michelle, that, and this is, again, this can maybe be a space to open it out beyond last week. When we experiment with methods of learning that, you know, if you think about it, I'm sure everyone here has been today in a classroom, teaching or learning remotely or in person. And this, what we're doing right now, there's someone speaking and there are people listening, and then there's a comment, and you know, there's a back and forth. And I think the thing with these workshops, or some of the methods that we're looking at, is they come at us from strange places and directions, and specifically with embodiment, as you said, Michelle. And when I reflect on last week, I think I was standing up and I was feeling like I don't want to stand up anymore. I don't want to like be in my body anymore, because something's happened to me where it isn't even like I wanted to run away, like a childlike kind of feeling of wanting to run away from how I was feeling at that point. And so, you know, when we think about unlearning and we think about decolonial practices associated with unlearning, there's going to be these moments where methods can affect us in ways because we're just brought completely outside of a kind of groove that we may not know necessarily why we've been in that groove the whole time. And like educational practices, you know, but you know, suddenly opening up that space can be quite scary. And so yeah, it's, I mean, I'm wondering if, you know, I was thinking, Elvia, like as a language teacher, you know, are there moments when it's like, I don't know, there's something beyond the kind of languages, you know, the language that you're teaching, where you have to, unlearning happening in the process of language teaching. I know that there are some mechanisms of teaching Quechua where you can't build, you don't want to necessarily build on Spanish or other languages. You want to kind of break free of those constraints. But I'm wondering whether that, you know, what Michelle and I are kind of discussing about the methodological vulnerability to a certain type of teaching, you know, how does that work as a language teacher? I'm really curious about that. Like how, you know, are there methods that you bring into your classes where you're like, okay, everything you know about language teaching out the window, and let's start afresh with this?
Right. So I think that what my students told me over the years, and something that maybe I don't realize, is that when I start my classes, for example, right, we chat a little bit, right, in Quechua. So we do this kind of question that sounds personal,
Mhm.
right? And one day my students told me, like, those questions sometimes in other classes sound too invasive,
Mhm.
but in for Quechua, right? You just ask them, like, it's a very common conversation where you could ask, how is your father? How was your class? How was your exam? These kind of things that sometimes they happen between friends and not like your instructor and your other classmates. But I think that for the during the 2 3, maybe 1 week something, my students feel a little bit uncomfortable maybe, but after that they start to telling us about their dogs, about their days, about how they met their boyfriends, these kind of things. And they usually tell me, right, like, why you do that? I'm like, that is how the community works. And like, they like it. At the end they get used to that, right? And that is something that cultural method, right? And during that conversation they usually speak using another suffix, like, wow, that's a great suffix. Do you remember that we worked with this suffix but we never saw in that context? No, now we are going to talk about that, these kind of things. And there is many times that my students in their own language, right, in Quechua, in Spanish or English, there is a verbs or some expression that they doesn't exist, right? And you make me remember when you are talking about sounds or these kind of things. A lot of verbs in Quechua came from the sound that we listen. For example, to get into the water, right? Like do some swimming under the water, right? So in Quechua, we says chulti. That is that we say chulti. That is mean that you have to go under the water. And I tell them, right, that is because that is how the water sound when you go inside. And they say, no, that's not the sound that make in English. I'm like, yes, it does. Right. So that is, we have a lot of verbs that make that we are using those verbs in order how they sound in Quechua, right? So the sound, music, and instruments, I think that these kind of elements are very present in indigenous classes, in indigenous language, and the interaction and the methods that we use. Usually they are more like friend, familiar, speaking, chatting. Sometimes we end in my catch of six, for example, right? We end speaking 30 minutes about everything but in catch, of course, but we are talking about weather and plants, how they bought the plant that is in the back of when I see him, but that is how Quechua works. It's consider the members as friends, but not in the level that we are not respecting to each other, not that level, but we are showing how in the community work, right? You know your friend very well, you know your friends, you know the person who lives like a block away from you, you know whose parents is who, because that is community, right? And something that does not happen in the, maybe, I don't know, in the US, right? I don't know what my neighbor's name is really, right? And I, because I am on and during the day, like watching a little bit, so I know whose car is whose, a little bit of that. But in the community, you know whose parents is who, what's name, how many children, everything. And I think that that is a method that we are using in Quechua, right? And that at the first time it's kind of shocking for my students, but then they get used to it and they like it, I think. Maybe that answer your
Oh
question.
yeah, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
I think about, like in the workshops, how interesting that all of the workshops start by setting a tone, like a particular tone of interaction, like you're saying, Elvia, and loosening people up. So I've actually done this with my classes. Idris, I think we did it in our class where we kind of shook off a little bit, like physically moved around before we started the class. And I think it does put us kind of in a different disposition, you know. The other thing, maybe Idris, you can comment a little bit, but we had a really great class yesterday, I think, you know, just in terms of dialoguing instead of having it be like student teacher, you know, like that, where you're fielding the questions and orienting the conversation or lecturing, you know. And instead, we kind of shifted up things a little bit and had kind of a dialogue. And I don't know, the tone felt a little bit more relaxed and people were participating. I don't know how you felt about that, Idris, and if you would consider that like, is that a method, you know, that kind of approximates us to something different than what we're used to? Or is it just that we just had a casual class, you know? And if we did have just a casual class, how can we repeat that experience? Because it actually was extremely productive, right?
I think it was maybe even a combination. Like, you know, like the traditional classes kind of have like an expectation to, like, you know, it's like, this is how it's going to like kind of, it's almost like a preset of motions, but then the method itself was really more so, that's not something that's really as, I guess, fluid, or maybe it is fluid, something like that, where you're opening up the material for what we were like, you know, reading up on the past few weeks. And then we had a really, really great discussion and just kind of built on each other's conversation. So like if I brought up something about how yesterday's reading like made some sort of correlation to different types of religions or the spirituality of like the forest or even like physics, then Michelle would then kind of like feed off that, bring up an example of how, yeah, like, you know, in a spiritual sense, like, you know, you talk to one plant, you know, very, very negatively, it's going to die. But you talk highly to another plant, it's going to grow and, you know, it's going to blossom. And then everyone would just kind of like, you know, just popcorn off one another and keep going and going and going. And then it was interesting. It was almost like you, Professor, were like, you know, almost like a moderator where it's like, you know, okay, like, let's switch it over more so, not so much like in terms of like shifting gears, like in normal classes, but more so like, okay, this was like one part of the section. This was now how to get more specific about trying to remember from yesterday the specific thing we transitioned from, but like we went from like the spirituality of the forest and then into I can't remember off the top of my head, but
Yeah,
it was just
it's
really,
been a
really
long
cool how we got to
time.
make that transition. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like talking about ideas about knowledge, always jumping back and forth, you know, between the context of Yanomami shaman, Davi Kopenawa, and then our context, you know. But one of the things that also came up, you know, and I think that Elvia, maybe this is also kind of connected to like the format that we establish, right? Because ultimately, the reading was the words of a shaman from a book that's called The Falling Sky. And he kept saying in his words, white people are not listening, you know, like we're speaking. It was very repetitive in the narrative, right? But he kept coming back to this about like people are not listening. And in our class, you know, because we kind of take on like a lot of different perspectives from the Andes and Amazonia, it really requires people to have a much more open mind and to figure out like how do we listen, right? Like how do we actually open ourselves up to hear the importance of what the shaman is saying, you know, beyond just kind of like a we read it, this is what he said, point, you know, but like how to really engage it. So yeah.
Just jumping on it is, for example, you made me remember also when you know the Quechuas speak like you don't know how to read the river. I'm like, how we are going to read the river? The reader is sick and is telling you. I'm like, how? I don't understand what he's telling you. You know, the potatoes are growing small. It's telling you that the water is not good. It's telling you that you are digging, you know, the rivers in order to obtain the soil from the rivers, and you are not, you know, putting or organizing the stones. The river is telling all those kind of things, and you are not able to read, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reading always go beyond the writing version. In the communities are going to always go far away from the writing because we are not a language that is used to be in the reading, right? So we are more like speaking listening to the forest, right? Listening to the branches, but not just a sound, right? But what is telling us? Oh, very far, the wind is very strong, so it means that we are going to know that there's not going to be too much corn this year, because they are going to fall because of this strong wind. So there is many things that we have to read, right? Also, I know that in the US you have also many things to when you read, right? You have some there's in Pennsylvania, right, that they have some activity with a groundhog animal, right? When this showing something is spring's coming, something like that, right? That is reading, right? That is reading. The dead animal didn't speak, didn't make any sound, right? But it's telling you something. But you have to be able to read that.
Yeah.
Right, the students is telling you something when they like your class, for example, yesterday. What is telling you that they are so stressed to have those classes when you just share the screen and talk about that. You can teach culture and other culture and other things too by just putting a little bit of the year experience, comparing with what you are doing today, these kind of things, right? They are telling you, everything is telling us something. And in indigenous culture, we always are trying to look, how the birds are singing to know what's coming for us. I do remember when we have the chiwaku, right? The chiwaku it's beautiful. It's a very beautiful black bird with a yellow, mouth. And so you are going to see that. And my mother, you used to say, oh, someone is going to come. I'm like, how you know that? Nobody knows that someone is going to come. No, Chiwaku is Wagashan, Chiwaku Wagashan, right? It's crying. I'm like, okay. But yes, at the 6, 7 in the afternoon, my grandpa arrives, my father arrives. So you know that someone is coming. I'm like, how you know that's coming? That reading goes more than just textbooks or these kind of things. And I'm very glad that we are listening, but maybe we are just focused on sound even. Sometimes reading is nothing to be with read or even listening. Sometimes it's see, right? Appreciate other elements that are there.
Yeah, no. So first, welcome, Kurt. We're so glad you could join us. And Elvia, just to pitch in just really quickly, but there's a book that's called Manos Sabias para Criar la Vida, and it's about Andean agricultural technologies, exactly about what you're talking about, like where people basically read the insects or where the birds are making their nests in order to predict climatic events, or what type of production, they're going to have that year. So it correlates very closely with what you're talking about. And in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, I teach a class that's called Alternative Literacies and Historiographies of the Andes in Amazonia. And it's about that. It's about how basically like all of these different things require different literacies, right? Like not just written, but that these other things also are telling stories or conveying information.
Michelle, can it really follows off something that Elvia was saying, and kind of bridging that question of non-human elements, asking us to read them, but also how those elements are kind of recuperated within indigenous cultures. So in the sense of language starts to reflect those elements, as you were also saying with the diving in as well, Elvia. So if you're okay with this, I just wanted to play you a snippet from the radio show that I'm working on right now, which is about indigenous language learning. And it's about, in relation to this exhibition at Columbus Printed Arts called Potufaita Tusi, which is a reading room in Samoan. And it's curated by a Samoan artist and academic, Leolia Shragi. And the full title of the exhibition is Be Courageous Language Teachers. And in the exhibition, you have books which are selected by a group of indigenous artists, including Sebastian Calfuqueira Liste, who's a Mapuche artist who's part of our research group. And also they create these prints and the first one is actually available now. And we talked about the language phrase in this print before. But before I show you the print, I just want us to listen to Laoli describe the print, because actually it tells a story, and it tells a story of the language phrase. And so just give me a second and I'll just kind of cue up the audio from my file. It might just take me a second so we can hear them, and they identify as them, tell us about the print as well. So if you give me a second, I will, let me share screen. It's going to be a boring shared screen because it's just an audio file. So give me 1 second, sorry. And I'll just share, and then I'm going to be trying to find the right spot in the audio. Don't know why this is my audio player. It's very boring, so I apologize. And I'm going to share the sound in a second. Okay, I think this is a good moment. I'll go for it. Okay, so I'm sharing sound. Let me know if you can hear.
A nice period of time after we've each contributed text to this reading room. We get to then ponder, really ponder and reflect and think about how it would work and what kind of forms these can take. And so that's been really wonderful with Eliza.
I also asked Laoli to talk about the print that they created for this project in collaboration with Alyssa Smith and print fellows at Columbus Printed Arts. And here's what they said.
For this project, I created with Eliza, Eliza totally worked on this. I sent a few images and some phrases, and we decided on this work, which is kind of red sepia tone treatment of an image from our clan lands in Afyamalu, which is about 25-30 minutes drive up the mountains from Apia, which is partially some of my clan territories as well, on the island of Upolu in what's currently the independent state of Samoa, a banana republic, I'd like to add. And with a despot dictator, we need to get out. And so this, there's some taro plants, you can see trees in the background, and it's right next to the Cross Island Road, which follows an ancient walking track from prior to colonization. The kind of entrance to a few hectares, maybe 10 acres of lands that my mom and dad are building a house on, and hopefully a healing center, a lot of fruiting trees and herbs and medicines. And my brothers and I have grand plans of creating a writing bungalow, music composition bungalow, and painting studio or something like that. And so this phrase is actually a prayer that my mom would use when my brothers or I had hurt ourselves, and kind of close your eyes, slowly tap the place that had been hurt, and repeat this prayer, which is to one of the birds as a deity form. So I'm quite surprised that this survived, because it's Samoan culture is heavily Christianized and colonized, and things just seep through the cracks. So I'll read it out. Paia lava ti o aile ti o tala lele lava. Paia lava ti o aile ti o tala lele lava. And I just really wanted to kind of honor that relationship. Obviously, through my mother and my grandmother, a very strong kind of matrilineal connection to land in Samoa. And as I was speaking a little bit before, the loss on my father's side kind of emphasizes that connection. And growing up in Samoa, but also in Australia, you have this kind of like flow geographically and spiritually. So that's really important to me. And I hope that to kind of promote some of our prayers and things like this, that I think Maori and Hawaiians and Aboriginal peoples of Australia have been really successful in kind of raising that level of recognition in their own communities, and I'd love to see that happen in Samo communities too.
Here it is. So now you get to see it. Back a little bit. And the phrase is on the top here. So that's the photograph is of the family's homeland. And interestingly, Leoli didn't translate the phrase, but I'll just, Michelle may remember as well what it means, but it means holy or sacred, Aya. And then lava is kind of intensifying, so very holy, so very sacred, Tuaila Tiotala, and the Tiotala is this kind of kingfisher bird that is also this deity. And this, I don't know, this is a verbal form that means something like that this bird turns, so that you see the bird turn. And then the Lele lava is good, so good or very good. So this, I was really brought to attention with what Elvia was saying as well, but this idea of the bird turning, I just kind of picture Leoli's mother tapping on his knee, saying this phrase of, you know, sacred, sacred, the bird is turning, good, very good. Like that something has happened in the world that has then changed their relationship to them herding themselves and this kind of thing. So I know that Leoli didn't share the translation for us, but I just felt it was kind of relevant to make the point and the connection with what Elvia was saying. And I'll put a link to the project in the chat so you'll see.
So I don't know, I'm maybe thinking about what Richard is saying, you know, like the relationship between the bird and healing, the presence of the mom, the physical act of tapping, you know, like all of those things create kind of like a holistic picture. Not about like culture, or understanding, or anything like that, but about maybe like healing, you know, and about our connections with all of these things as part of like the world, right? Which I think kind of maybe comments about our place in the world, you know, kind of decentering the human and just kind of placing it in a much broader context of interaction, you know, and interdependency maybe. I don't know if that's kind of where we might take the conversation, but it's just a thought that kind of came into my mind.
Yes, and the aspect that Richard is mentioning, right, is always present in indigenous culture, right? The singing, right, is make the connect when even you are offering something to, you know, the Mother Earth or something, you are going to always listen, you know, Pachamama, Gawampun, like kind of poetry, you know, that we are telling Pachamama these kind of things. But also you made me remember, you know, the mothers when, you know, the babies are starting to speak, and they are just making noises when they are very little, right? And the mama usually put his finger on top on your mouth, say ako, ako, right? And for you to teach you how to speak, right? They are starting to doing these kind of things, right? And all the time. And I don't know who teaches the mothers, but every mother that came to your house is like ako, ako. I'm like, why? Who knows? Who says that ago is the sound of the poor baby, right? But every time like ago, ago, and also when they are starting to walk, right? There's a lot of many aspects how, you know, those body, you know, the body expression, the sound and everything have a relationship with the nature, right? So for example, just an example for giving you, guys, maybe I'm jumping to another topic, but I hope not. But for example, when the children, right, is lazy for start walking, right? That's what we says, lazy for start walking. The baby has 2 years and he or she is not starting walking. So what our grandmoms do is they go and collect the what is grillo in English?
Cricket.
Yes, that one, but the not the green one, okay? The one that lives, you know, close to your house, right? She found that the cricket, and she makes walk the cricket under in the baby leg, right? He makes him walk and walk and walk many times, but she doesn't hurt the cricket. Yeah, just make him walk, and then the mother free the cricket, right? And I'm like, why you are doing this? Because the cricket is giving the baby his leg, right? And I'm like, my little brother was very lazy to walk in. That every day was, hunting the cricket in my house. Elvia, where is the cricket? Where's the cricket? Is like I'm looking for the cricket because my lazy little brother doesn't want to walk. So every day I saw my mother walking, making walk the cricket in my little brother's legs every day until he started walking.
I love that story, Elvia. I didn't know about that, but also the idea that life force or skills can be transferred, right, from different people. It kind of reiterates that connection with nature and with the land, right? Like how connected we are to all of that. And we'll keep it open if anyone wants to jump in on some of the conversations that Evia has brought to us. But I also wanted to invite Kurt to jump in since he was also at the workshop last week. So I didn't know, Kurt. We've gone beyond the workshop in our discussion, but if it ties into some of your experience, we'd love to hear from you.
Mine's going a million miles a minute, all sorts of different things. So I'm just trying to settle down. Let me think about that for a minute. Trying to remember a little. I'm sorry I missed the beginning. That would have been.
I think it's been a busy week for all of us. Both Emily and I were trying to remember too. It's like a kind of confluence of events.
I did have a really lovely time in the breakout session. Just I was in a team of two, and ended up being a really good conversation, and then not enough time, kind of. So no, I really enjoyed that. I got a lot out of it. I just wish there was more time to work on the sort of projects more, because there's a lot of room for creativity.
Yeah.
And one other thing is, I really was sort of flustered at having to move around. It was strange. It kind of caught me by surprise. And part of it, if I had been alone, it would have been fine. Or if certain people, like if my bosses had seen me, that would have been cool because we're all really good friends. But then some of the other, like customers walk in and stuff like that. It's like, there goes crazy Kurt again. But I mean, that's a convenient excuse, but it also does physical expression. I think, it kind of makes me uncomfortable. So it was really good to be able to do that.
So I don't know, Richard, that kind of ties in a little bit to your, maybe in some ways, to your sort of reaction to the workshop. But also just to describe, like in the breakout rooms, what Kurt did with his partner, because we were trying to overcome the issues of technology. Like you can't play at the same time together because the sound doesn't work on Zoom the right way, right? So some groups did like a sequencing to try to overcome that technology. But Kurt, and who were you with? I can't remember.
Forget her name.
I can't remember. But in any case,
it was Emily.
Yeah, Emily, it was Emily? Oh my God. Okay, so it was Emily. So Emily, maybe you can talk about this more, but you guys did more like where Kurt plays the music and then Emily did kind of like a bodily interpretation, and it was so beautiful and lovely.
Yeah, I think kind of like why we ended up doing that was through our discussion, we found that I connected a lot more to like the moving around, but Kurt connected a lot more to the sound aspects of the workshop. Because I think we were talking about how I found it very, very hard to stay still during the times when like it was Chell would say like find the stillness after the movement aspects, but Kurt was finding it difficult to do the movement aspects of the workshop. So I think that's part of the reason that led us to do that more sound and movement combination in ours. So.
Yeah, and it was what we should do next time, Emily, is each do the thing we're uncomfortable with. So I just conveniently had a couple of instruments along with me.
Well, and we were talking before about like the vulnerability or like the discomfort of stepping out of our comfort zones, whether it's in a different type of conversational dynamic or a different language, you know. But I remember last semester, actually it was last spring, in one of my classes, I gave a very unconventional exam. That Elvia, you can relate, but I just provided prompts. You know, we had been doing all this reading, and I provided like corn, earth, water, stones, and they had been reading about these things in Andean context. So the idea was to kind of evoke, you know, like whatever connections, multiple connections they had to the readings. But it really asks the students to step completely out of their comfort zone in terms of like what Idris was saying, like the conventional, you know, expectation for tests. And I had one student who started hyperventilating and had to step out with a panic attack. So that kind of physical, you know, reaction to, like Richard was saying, like stepping out into something different or unknown, you know, it starts approximating us to where we need to go and what we need to do if we are going to be more inclusive and listen more broadly, you know, that it really does challenge us, not just in an intellectual sort of way or, hey, let's try this new methodology, but like personally, physically, you know. So I love your idea, Kurt, of doing what you're uncomfortable with next time and potentially experimenting with that.
So we have about just 5 minutes left, and we try to keep this to an hour. But unless, Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that next week we have are we still having our Unlearning Hour next week? Because of the I just wanted to check just in case we were going to not have it.
Yeah, no. So thank you for reminding us, Richard. So next week and the following week, so it's two weeks in a row that we will not have the Unlearning Hour because of the ILCLA conference. So this is the Indigenous Languages and Cultures of Latin America conference, which is going to be taking place the 19th and the 20th, and then again the 26th and 27th. So that gives us an opportunity to attend that conference, you know, in different panels. Many of them specifically related to language and language methodologies, right? And others more about cultural, you know, sort of expression from Latin America. But I don't know, Elvia, do you want to talk a little bit? I can invite Elvia and Richard to talk a little bit about the panels that we're planning to present, you know, as a contribution to the conference. And I will make it a point to send out the link. We just got it. Actually, today we got the link, you know, with the schedule. So I've been waiting for that to send it out to the group, but I'll send that out so that you all have access to joining in. No registration necessary. I think it's open to the public. So I invite Elvia and Richard maybe to talk about what we plan to do and exhibit, you know, and contribute to that conference.
Yeah, so we are going to actually show a little bit of a methodology, right, that involves the work that the indigenous people, organization, everyone is doing in order to include, right, the aspects or methods or elements from the indigenous art, music, and other elements into the classes, but not only as an addition, but as a perspective of teaching, and also like a different method for the students to consider, right? So we are going to kind of show them an example, right? How we are going to bring some very cultural element to the classroom, and then how we are going to combine that element with the topic or with the literature that we are reading, to show them that song or that instrument represent literature from that community, represents culture, represents a lot of knowledge that we want to introduce, that not as an object but a living thing that's going to say or express many things in the classroom. So I think that we are going to show a lot of things, right, Michelle? Just to a little bit talking about that.
Yeah, it turned into more of a performance than than a talk, And one of the powerful things for me is that, thinking about like land acknowledgements and that type of thing. That's kind of like a broader perspective, but then the actual exercise that we're doing with our partners from the network of artists of the Andes, Red de Artistas Interculturales Comunitarios, they're going to present a song. It's such a lovely song. It's called Shuk Quiquita, which means like the little earthworm. And it's about the little earthworm kind of going through the earth and getting, like, it pokes out his nose and it turns red because it's too cold and the sun has gone down, and then like the kind of like the daily like life of an earthworm. And what it brought up for us, it was like, what a unique like perspective, like a totally different perspective on relationships with the land and land acknowledgement and stuff like that, so we try to embody that by way of the song.
And in our panel, we are focused on the impact of the artistic residency of Mapuche artist Sebastián Cafuqueo Aliste, when Sebastián was with us in Columbus. Was it fall 2019? Yeah, I was just trying to think. It was, yeah, how long ago it was. They were part of workshops. They were part of reading groups. They were part of classes in terms of dance and movement classes and performance classes, as well as a performance in and of itself. And we prepared for their performance and their visit by watching films that they were part of. And so each of us are going to kind of respond to not just the aspects of Sebastián's work that we engage with, but the impact on us and a kind of celebration of their work. And my specific role is to zoom in live from the Potufaita Tusi library, showing some of Sebastián's recommended books, and showing the kind of embodied afterlife of their project from that library as well. So we're excited about, I guess, celebrating Sebastián, and Sebastián will be there as part of our panel as well. So they will actually present a kind of newer work and a new performance-related piece as well. So yeah, it's going to be such an exciting weekend.
Yeah, and we should mention, Richard, that actually the Unlearning Hour emerges, from that residency as sort of processing of everything that Sebastián left us with, and not just sort of like, okay, he came, he shared his, talent, his performances, and left, but the fact that we continue to process that that very powerful experience and trying to engage, some of the things that Sebastián left us with. So
I think that was important because this group before was called This Decoloniality, and it was based on reading a particular book and kind of bridging from reading that book. But our Unlearning Hour, we don't have a book. We don't have a thing that we're doing all together in terms of like, we need to do that to prepare and then we can then talk about it. It kind of happens we reflect on what's happened. So we continue to reflect on the workshops as well as Sebastian's visit, or well as other things that come into our worlds right now. And that has been very freeing, because it has meant that people can show up, and it's not like, oh, I didn't do the preparation, or even you don't even need to have gone to the workshop. It's just the spending of this hour together, and there may be threads that you follow and never return, and think about maybe things that came up. It's just 1 hour to pull us out of the regular meetings that we have. And that hour is over, and we're not going to take any more time of your time on a Friday afternoon. And it's so good to see all of you and see new faces, and welcome, and hope to see you again. And if not, that's great. Let's take our ethos of the Unlearning Hour into your classes, into your interactions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
That was a lot of fun.